All right. We're here for another episode of Confessions of a Street Broker. And got a very special guest with us today. Been around the block many times. And
well, thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob Darrouzet, Design District Real Estate. Trinity Real Estate, man. That's it's funny. We always talk with people with submarket specialization on here, but you put it in the name.
Oh, well, yeah. Tom Buck gave me a lot of hassle about that.
So, well, thanks for coming on, man. I'm excited to kind of just really hear your story and just all, you've seen many iterations of Dallas real estate and the transformation of the design district, really. And so, let's just kind of start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up? Did you grow up here in Dallas and all that? And
I grew up in Dallas, down in Greenbrier and Highland Park.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was an engineer at TI over on Lemon by the Home Depot.
Yeah.
And then in 1959, we moved out to Preston Forest area because he got transferred to the big TI thing at LBJ and Central. And so, I went to grade school, high school, and then went down to Austin.
What high school did you go to?
Jesuit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you went and became a Longhorn, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I was there. Those were tough times during, especially 68, 69, 70, the Vietnam War and stuff.
Yeah.
I remember they had big riots the week of graduation. They shut down the university and told us, you just graduate with the grades you have.
Yeah. Wow. So most of the students were they're protesting the war then, huh?
Right. It was the day of the Kent State shootings.
Oh, okay.
On May 5th. I'll never forget it.
Yeah. And then just everybody on campus kind of took up the arms of it and just.
Yeah, it was total chaos.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to be, but what an interesting thing to see, the ability for the First Amendment to get really used, so it's, you always kind of see all these different things where people get their rights taken away, but that was, that's kind of, although it's chaos, it's kind of cool in a way to kind of see it being exercised.
Yeah.
So
it was very different.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen anything like that ever in my life.
Yeah. So you're at Austin, going to Texas. What happens after that? Wait, what did you get your degree in?
Well, I majored in history with a kind of a sub-major in Asian studies. And then in those days, you could get a deferment for teaching. So when I tried to get a job getting out of school, it was really hard. I went a lot of places and interviewed, but they all had alumni coming back. But a friend of mine had his aunt was a nun out at Ursuline, and so I applied there just to do it, and they offered me a job in that summer. So, by August after graduation, you're thinking, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So I taught at Ursuline for 3 years, then went to grad school, then I taught at Jesuit for 7 years.
Did you teach history?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Modern European for the most part.
And then where'd you get your grad degree at?
St. Mary's in San
Antonio?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you moved down to San Antonio for a couple of years?
No, I went down there for a year and lived in the law school dorm, and then I got called by Jesuit to come back. So I went back, and then I went back in the summers.
So you were at Ursuline for 3 years, you said, and then Jesuit. Grad school for a year, and then Jesuit for 7.
Yeah.
And then what happened after teaching?
Well, by 1979, I had climbed from a whopping $5,000 a year to $6,750 a year. And I thought, this is nuts. I mean, there's no way I could even begin to buy a home or raise a family on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So my friend Larry Moser at LG Moser, his dad retired, and he was going to start his own real estate company. And we'd known each other since kindergarten. And so he said, why don't you come try this? You know, it was summer. And so he threw me in real estate school with a bunch of ladies from residential real estate. And then I just went to work. And I know we put a sign on an abandoned restaurant down in Inwood between Stemmons and Irving Boulevard. And it was the summer of 1980, one of the hottest summers on earth. And we sold it the next week. Mama Nympha from Houston came up and she bought the thing.
For Nympha's, it's called Nympha's restaurant. It's a Mexican food restaurant. Yeah. But I remember it had the parrot on it and all that. Yeah.
And, you know, I got a commission check for $13,000 and I thought, whoa, I can do this, you know. So, I mean, you know, but in those days, things were very, Dallas was just beginning to boom.
Right.
And we had about 6 agents, and we would drive these circular driving routes each week to gather information. And I remember computers were just coming in, and Larry bought a $12,000 IBM computer with 8-inch floppy drives. And we started loading information because the one thing you realize quickly is the buildings, they don't change. Yeah. They're on the street. They're there, especially in Old Trinity. And so once you log in the information, it's pretty well there.
Yeah.
But when I started, we were using little index cards for all the vacancies.
Yeah.
It was just insane. No, it took them forever to find a property.
Yeah.
But,
and then was there, you know, I guess there wasn't MLS or CoStar or any of that stuff. It was just, you just kind of had to know your neighborhood. And
yeah. And of course it got cumbersome as more and more buildings were built and the drive times got longer and longer. So at some point I just decided, you know, Trinity was so dense.
Yeah.
I just started working down there and calling owners and users.
Yeah. You know, I was at a point in my career where I was working Brook Hollow and I was working Redbird as well. And, you know, I loved Redbird. I loved the buildings down there. I thought they were really cool. I thought they were very similar to Brook Hollow, just bigger. And, but what I found was that I kept getting, you know, always worked with local owner, user, entrepreneur guys, right? And, you know, and well, if they own a business that offices in Redbird, they live in Waxahachie. They live in Red Oak.
Right.
So whenever they would be like, hey, I really want to go buy a building. I'm like, great. And then they're like, can you show me anything in like Ennis or Red Oak? And I'm like, oh man, I got to drive. So I really looked at my geography at one year, kind of going into the end of the year. And I was like, man, I'm getting so spread out. So after that year, I was like, I'm just going to dump Redbird and I'm just going to focus from Regal Row to Inwood. And I stopped at the Trinity and I was like, I'm just going to master this little domain, you know?
I used to have the whole Brook Hollow in my system too, but I dropped it in about 2007. It just got to be too cumbersome.
Yeah.
But the situation down in Trinity was such that, you know, I was a victim of the oil embargo back in the 70s, and I always thought, well, if gas goes to $8, I can just park my car at the end of the street and walk. And I can do it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of one of the things that made me stay down there. Besides, it was interesting people.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't widget makers. They were artists and antique dealers and history-oriented people that knew stuff. And it was far more interesting to talk to them, for me, than to talk to some guy selling ball bearings.
Yeah. So when did who designated it the design district? When did that like happen?
Well, I marketed it as that.
Okay.
On Dragon and Slocum. And Lucy Crow, she wanted to call it the Decorative Center District. And then Michael Avalon came along in like the 2000s, and he wanted to change the name to Lower Oak Lawn, and people just went nuts. And so then we had an association at that time, and everybody chipped in, and we bought those street sign toppers and called it Design District. And we did that because Michael Ablon was so pushing to change the name to Lower Oak Lawn.
Yeah.
And I know the people at D Magazine went nuts. Peggy Levinson, and they all called a meeting and said, we got to stop this. You know? And so Lucy kind of caved in and said, okay, we'll just do Design District.
Yeah.
And Dallas Design District, as opposed to Miami and other places in the country. Yeah. The big deal was getting people to take the existing buildings and convert them into showrooms.
Yeah.
And the first one we did was San Miguel Allende, although Lola Flaster had an antique store out on Highline.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the designers, John Aston Perkins and those people, had their offices on Highline. But Highline in those days was just a boulevard with grass and Highline towers. Yeah. It wasn't until years later that they tried to beautify it.
So this is early 2000s. And but for then 20 years, so you're working the Design District. You started in 1980. You're working the Design District for 20 years. So the tenant makeup was still the same down there. There wasn't the widget maker. It was like everybody had congregated there as the Design District without the official name of the Design District, really.
Right. And that's when all this got bandied around. And then in 1998, Ed Oakley, our city councilman, came and said, if we're going to make this work, we really need to be a planned development. And that's when, through Barbara Mallory Caraway, you had to have somebody at the city make the request that you become a planned development. And she did. And so I ended up being the chairman of that because I knew everybody.
Yeah.
And then it took 4 years to write the PD, and then it passed in 2002.
Okay.
And that changed what we needed because we could have more restaurants, we could have residential. And one of the biggest issues forever, all those years, was the fact that there was a wet area from Industrial Boulevard back to the underground stream. And we believe that was because in the old days, that was called Fish Trap Road. And the city fathers didn't want all these guys going down there fishing, drinking whiskey. And so it was beer only. And we tried to get it changed, and all the city fathers and governmental people said, you can't change that. It's a precinct thing. But then in November of 2014, they just put it on the ballot and changed all of Dallas into wet and dry wet areas.
Yeah.
And that allowed us to do, that's when the restaurants really began to come because they really need alcohol to make the thing work.
Yeah.
Make the numbers work. So this was a huge thing to us.
Yeah, no, that totally changes the landscape at that point. So that's kind of where then live work starts at that time and all those things.
Yeah.
Who developed most of the buildings in the Design District? Was it Crow?
No, many people. There was a man who I met, T.A. Kleinman. He was the CFO of Commercial Metals.
Okay.
In the early 20s. Went to SMU, graduated in 2022. They were immigrants from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, Jewish people. And he built many buildings, Paul Lewis, all these guys, a lot of just single-minded individuals. And I said, well, how much did it cost to build one of these small 5,000-foot buildings? He said, about $6,000. And so the Stemmons family chopped up the neighborhood into lots that were 45 feet by 125 or 150 feet. And it was platted that way, but you could buy 10 feet into the next lot if you wanted. So you have some discrepancies. Most of the buildings are in that 5,000 foot range. And gosh, there were so many. Mr. Kleinman told me about so many people who he knew who had built a building and then rented it out for future income. He owned 5. And so, that was the impetus in those days for those guys, was just, it was a place to invest.
Mm-hmm.
And where else were you going to go?
Yeah.
There weren't any other parks. Dallas's warehousing districts, in the very old days, they were in the Cedars. Then they moved to Deep Ellum. Then they moved to the West End. And after World War II, they ended up down in the Trinity because the Stemmons family had reclaimed the land, and it wasn't really doing anything with it. And it was, they're the ones, the big flood in 1908 wiped out everything in the basin. And so they decided to build the levees by 1928. And the pumps actually came from New Orleans. And then the war came. And so after the war, they decided to go ahead and map out the Trinity Industrial District. And because it's done that way, in order to buy or sell, you don't have to replat anything. You just meets and bounds survey, and off you go.
Yeah. No, I think that's a Dallas-wide thing as well. Yeah, because
in planned industrial parks.
Yeah, no, I've done that before. I bought 2 buildings that were on one plat, and I meets and bounds and sold them off to 2 other guys.
That's right.
So, so I guess everybody thought of Trinity as an industrial park at first. So it's funny now to look forward so much further. The big issue in the Trinity is always parking now. Well, parking isn't that much of an issue with industrial users, but the retail and the evolution of it has created its parking problem.
We're not really sure. No one's ever been able to tell me how the Stemmons family was able to do that and have all the parking, pretty much public head-end parking.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is there just weren't that many cars. And the trucks, too. John Stemmons had 3 deed restrictions. Your property, your dock had to be 25 feet off the property line. You couldn't build a metal building,
mm-hmm.
and you couldn't be a nuisance to John Stemmons.
That was in the deed.
Yeah. And they voted on this every 5 years. And then it was rail served, because during the war, the rail was everything.
Yeah.
And so you had these areas behind each building that were 53 feet wide, the so-called railroad beds. And the Stemmons family had a deed with Rock Island. And then in 1990, the Rock Island Railroad went bankrupt. And the city of Dallas claimed that they got all the spurs. And the Stemmons said, no, we have a deed. And they won the lawsuit and got all the railroads back. And George Schaefer and them, they tried to sell them, but they were sending out 3-inch thick legal documents to people like Mr. Kleinman. And he said, what is this?
Yeah.
So I got his, we purchased his. And so George Schaefer said, well, you want to sell them all? There's 2 million feet. And the Stemmons people were just going to sell the land. But I said, you can't just sell the land. You've got to put an easement through there. Otherwise, everybody's going to be landlocked in the middle. So we started putting easements. It took 10 years to sell off all that stuff. And the people that bought it for $2 a foot, now it sells for $50, $75, $100 a foot, depending on how bad you need parking.
Yeah.
So nobody saw that coming. A few people did and bought a lot. But,
well, that's like the building you're selling us right now. The fact that we have all that rail bed behind it, it makes the deal so unique.
16,000 feet, and it's private property.
Yeah,
and there's no easement in yours because Dallas Power and Light had that easement through there, and that meant there was no rail could get there.
Yeah.
So you have all these little minute things that nobody really knows about that impact deals.
Yeah.
And that turned out to be quite a thing. The other thing was the evolution and proliferation of showrooms.
Yeah.
And that started back in the 80s. Y.C. King came to me and said, "We want to buy Fulco Pad." I said, "It's not for sale." So I went to the owner,
Bob
Jutras, and
yeah.
I said, "Mr. Jutras, they want to buy it." I said, "Give them some ridiculous number. Nobody will pay for it." He said, $700,000. And Mr. King said, "Okay." And Jutras was flabbergasted. So we sold it, and they turned it into Y.C. King Porcelain and China Showroom, and we're there for many years until the brothers passed away.
Is that how Bob moved to Regal Row? Did he move to Regal Row after selling that building, or did he move to another building in Design District?
He moved to 2040 Farrington there at Manufacturing.
Okay.
And
I know the building. Yeah.
From there, he moved to Regal Row. And
that's where I called on him. He was at Regal Row at my time. So, but he always told me how you moved him around.
We moved a lot of people around.
Yeah.
And that was always the tricky thing of brokering was, you took a chance on a small company like Laser Image. I started them in 1,000 feet back in the 93 or something. And today they're in a 45,000-foot building. It's worth millions and huge company. We moved them 4 or 5 times over the years. So there's basically 3 kinds of entities in the district. You got pure landlords like Mary Moser, who owned 5 buildings but didn't have a business there. Mm-hmm. I call them absentee landlords. Mm-hmm. Then you had owner occupants, and then you had corporate tenant people, and the showrooms. Most of the showrooms, especially the big national ones, are corporate, and it's harder to make a relationship with a corporate thing because the managers leave and come and go, and you don't have that owner occupant thing you did like we did with most of the furniture and antique dealers.
Yeah.
Like Louis Rosenbach and Bruno Delacroix, Poubois, and those guys.
Yeah.
And then there were also a lot of ladies involved in design and in antiques and lighting and furniture. So that was a different thing. You weren't dealing with an all-male tenancy anymore. Mm-hmm. And, of course, that was the age of women-owned businesses expanding, too. Mm-hmm. So that helped put pressure. It's always been a function of market pressure. And the district, it goes up and down like a wave through time. And I know where the bottoms are and where the peaks are.
Yeah.
So-called buy low, sell high guys are always out there. After in 93 to 95, when the RTC took over, we were selling buildings for $10 a foot.
Yeah.
Now they're selling for $350, $400 a foot.
I know.
So it's kind of strange.
I always remember Jeff he said he had the ability to buy 3 buildings on Levy Street for $13 a foot, and Mr. Lynn told him he was overpaying.
Well, I sold a number of buildings for $10 a foot, and then later we sold them for $30 a foot, and the guys thought they were making a fortune.
Yeah.
So, but that's what happens when you know the neighborhood and you're the broker and you can see where things are going.
Yeah.
Some buildings don't convert very well. I remember I sold the Globetrotter building that was 22,000 feet on Dragon to Mike Kuttner and Joel Cooner, and they chopped it up into, 3 or 4 different spaces, and they're just high-end showrooms and art galleries now. So
and
they bought that, I think, for around $70 a foot. And of course, now they want me to find them buildings for $70. There's nothing out there like that.
No, especially not in that neighborhood. The one thing I always notice too, the design district, the tenants, 10,000 feet is probably that's a pretty big tenant in the design district, or Trinity,
The average is 4,000 feet.
Yeah.
And because when you jump up to 6,000 or 7,000 feet, you're suddenly up to 9, 10, 11,000 a month. And, the landlords, I keep telling them, look, that's just part of the business deal. They have to pay employees. They have to pay security. They have to pay all this stuff just to be open, utilities and stuff. So, it's not like it's just 7,000. Then it might be 10, 15,000 a month.
Yeah.
When they pay for all the stuff they have to pay for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's that's kind of, we've bought a lot of these small bay parks and stuff like that and raised the rents on people. But at some point, I kind of start looking at them now. I'm like, I don't know that I want to keep working this game. At some point, small businesses can only pay so much for before they look at it. I renewed a group in Inwood Trade Center, and the rent went to like $10.50 net. They were, and this was on 16,000, 17,000 feet. So, and they were coming from like $5.50 net. So you're talking about a significant increase. You're pretty much almost talking about the owner's salary at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I've had owners tell me, I don't even pay myself a salary. I have to pump it back in.
Yeah.
But, the situation with the tenants is shifting from mom and pop, which was the mainstay of most of those businesses, to national. And the national guys, they think Dallas is cheap.
Yeah.
Because they're paying a lot more in California, Chicago, New York. But the locals, if you have a local and they're paying $7,000 a month, and then they do 5 years and come out of that, and the rents gets raised to $20,000 a month, they're gone.
Yeah,
and you hate to see that because those guys are kind of the mainstay.
Well, that's what I'd say probably 2018, 19, and 2020. I just made a phrase. I was like, I'd look at a building, I'd say, I need a design district refugee for this building in Brook Hollow. And they started coming over to Brook Hollow because they're like, oh, this really isn't this far. It's so funny to me. I always feel like, tenants feel like these neighborhoods are like these big stretches to other places. And I'm like, it's like, what? This is all like one big mushed pot to me.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to keep happening because the people north of Wycliffe, they are claiming the name Design District North, but people use the name as far out as they need to go. Why? Because the rents.
Yeah. They're
trying to keep up with the rents.
So where does Design District officially end in Trinity?
Officially at Wycliffe.
Wycliffe. Okay. So if you're southwest, I guess that's kind of how that's running, of Wycliffe, your Trinity.
Yes.
So Valdina, all that stuff's Trinity.
And those 3 streets used to be called the fashion streets because they were just down the road from the apparel mart, which they tore down. But the new people, the new Trinity area is, I know Ed Oakley, we were always frustrated that we didn't have time to go ahead and make that another special purpose district because they're still zoned IR, industrial. And so to get to live work there, you have to apply to the Board of Adjustments and go through a lot of paperwork, which you don't have to do in Design District. And, of course, a lot of the Design District buildings, if you drive around, are converting to homes. And, my God, Ed Ewing's house on Glass Street is 5 stories, probably 30,000 feet. It's the kind of thing many years from now they'll say, oh, that's like the Carnegie home or something, you know. It was built during the boom of those entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see. I mean, back in the old days, nobody wanted to work down there.
Yeah.
Rents were $2. You didn't make much money. And now everybody I know is trying to get a sign up down there.
Yeah.
And there are people I never heard of.
Yeah.
That have signs down there.
Well, and it also kind of brings, it's for me, foreign brokers, right? Like, I'm used to seeing the normal people in Brook Hollow, the Streams, the NAIs, all that stuff. But you'll get a lot of Sotheby's and just some kind of like y'all do commercial. I thought you were like you know what I mean? It's like you start seeing some almost like residential people. I mean, Allie Beth Allman's leasing stuff down there because it's a live, it's.
No, they now they want to come because there's, if you sold a building for $10 a foot and it was $50,000, well, a split 3% commission wasn't much.
No.
But if that same building sells for $1 million, now you're talking some big commissions.
Yeah.
And that draws people too. And of course,
Sure.
the national brokers, they're kind of like, they're so big that it's hard for them to plant their feet and get going. But they do have a national presence, which makes a difference as opposed to the local guys. To be honest, I'm fairly frustrated with CoStar and LoopNet as a marketing tool. It's expensive, and I don't think I've made any deals using them.
I think CoStar and LoopNet is good for office leasing because office has all their shit together. Essentially, when you go to an office building, everybody has a plan, has the plans of the building. You know what I mean? They know the stuff. Industrial, it's been such just a hodgepodge of information over the years, especially in the B and C class stuff, that it's just like, there's all, and so I always felt on CoStar, I feel like they might I don't know that they're getting better. I just think maybe more people are chasing industrial now. So you're seeing a little more off of it, but at the end of the day, CoStar is kind of for the brokers and LoopNet seems to be for the users. But at the end of the day, I don't think anything beats being able to walk into someone's office and just be like, "Hey, do you know about this?" Because a lot of people just kind of keep their head down and go to work every day.
Oh yeah, the neighbors don't even know their neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the 90s, during that chaotic time, we had a strong owner-user organization of about 50 people. And we did, they wanted to change the name of Industrial Boulevard to Cesar Chavez Boulevard.
That's right. I remember that.
And we put out the word through our email system, and we had 150 guys show up at city council. And we told the council, who all you guys are from Trinity and do you pay taxes?
Yeah.
Everybody stood up and they said, well, we'll just change it that day to Riverfront. And that worked pretty well.
Yeah.
But in those days, we were skirmishing with all kinds of stuff like the name of the neighborhood, the signs, the Calatrava Bridge, the Trinity Strand Trail people. Everybody was trying to develop their different interests. And, you still had like Patchett Printing, 76,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
They're gone. Lilland's just left.
They went BK, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
When, I got in the business 2010, and man, it was like printer buildings were all I worked on. I could just sell a printer. It was leasing and selling printer buildings because I think someone told me one time there was like over 75, 80 printers in the Brook Hollow and Trinity area at one time.
It was a big deal before graphics and computers came along. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing. I get emails, hundreds every day from these incredibly cool graphics and aerials and stuff. We didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
And that's why I ended up drawing all those maps. And it was a way in which I could say, well, here's where you are and here's where you're moving to, and we can put a postcard out to your tenants about where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was one thing that's been true throughout, and that is if you move, even if you just move across the street,
mm-hmm.
people will say they can't find you.
Yeah.
I've been amazed by that phenomenon. So between that and parking,
constant battle.
Paving the rail beds is beginning to be much more prevalent, but we have a long way to go. We figured in those ones on the west side of Riverfront, we could park 200 cars in each rail bed. One-way slant, 60 degrees from one way going from Riverfront to Levee Street.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to also see things that we never dreamed back in the 80s, that somebody could build a 20-story building right next to the channel. And yet we have two over by the Virgin. And because people don't realize that the river basin, when you come down Oak Lawn and you drop down to Stemmons, you're dropping down into the river basin, which is about a mile across to the other side, Colorado Boulevard and Beckley. Mm-hmm. So for the eons, the basin had silt built up in it. And the channel, which winds through the district, that was the Trinity River. And so when you start to drill piers, it's about 70 feet to bedrock, and in some parts 45. But all that engineering is pretty incredible to us.
Yeah.
To be able to have that.
So aren't they, I feel like I always see this, aren't they building a park at some point, the Trammell Crow Park, or was it Trammell Crow, or I can't remember. There was a park they were going to build in the riverbed or something, or
that's pretty much gone.
Yeah,
because the river, they spent $4 million and built these rapids, mm-hmm. and the flood came along and washed the $4 million rapids away. And what they're sticking to now is mainly trails mm-hmm. and stuff outside the levees.
Yeah,
and after Katrina. In 1998, Mayor Kirk got us $183 million to work on the river. And in 2006, after Katrina, the Corps of Engineers, we spent $4 million testing our levees to make sure we didn't have sand under them like New Orleans. And the report came back that we were good and our levees were good. And that's important because of all the new lakes and reservoirs and where the water's going. Mm-hmm. And our biggest danger is not from the Trinity River flooding. Our biggest danger is if the Lake Louisville Dam ever broke. And they're saying that could put 10 or 20 feet of water down there. And if you drive down Turtle Creek Boulevard between Market Center and Irving Boulevard, mm-hmm. you'll see a blue I-beam going up. The top of that blue I-beam was the height of the water in the 1908 flood.
Oh, wow.
And so, that would be catastrophic. But we, the Corps and the people involved in that with the Lake Louisville, they watch that pretty good.
Yeah.
So we don't really see that happening either because it would literally come straight down and wipe out Preston Hollow and Highland Park and all those places too.
That was like right when I got in the business, 2010, there was like something going on where they were going to decertify the levees, I feel like again. And then everybody was scared to death. They wouldn't be able to get insurance on their buildings and all this stuff. And I thought it was funny, to your point, that people were worrying about their building in Brook Hollow. I'm like, what about the buildings in downtown Dallas? That's a lot bigger piece of real estate.
If you've ever been, that's why the Red Courthouse is up on top of the embankment, because the old courthouse that was down by the river, it got washed away too.
Okay.
And Reunion Station, mm-hmm. and where the trains come was kind of at the edge of the basin. And that was kind of the bad end. And so they put all that stuff there.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to mess with the river bottom because they couldn't count on it until the levees came not to flood. But all that stuff is kind of moot now. You know, they, as late as 2005, the World Trade Center flooded the first floor. And so they've been building these 14-foot high and wide culverts, and they're getting ready to replace the sanitary sewer line up riverfront. And it's supposed to be finished by 2025. But there's a moratorium on building any more high-rise buildings because we can't handle the sanitary part.
Yeah.
There's no more space.
So that's actually something. So that's down in the design district specifically, right? And so that's what I'd heard. You know, a lot of people started aggregating down there to build office buildings, and then they found out they can't do it because the sewer can't handle it.
That's right. And deals have been lost because of that.
Yeah.
The other thing that was amazing to me in all these 40 years was the surge back in the late 80s and 90s to build a reliever tollway along the river, either inside or outside. And they had 4 different routes. And, you know, those engineers spent 10, 15 years messing with that. And then in the end, they killed it. And it was to relieve, what was it going to relieve? It was going to relieve the air pollution from the gang up of cars in the canyon and on Stemmons Freeway. Because the EPA said, you got too much stuff. You got to spread it out. Well, recently, the government told the city of Dallas that their plan for relieving that is not working. And, of course, the greatest danger would be if they would try to put a reliever road down Riverfront Boulevard. But I don't think that would move traffic far enough away to dissipate the pollution. But I was just amazed at all the work that was done on that for many years and then never happened.
So where the design district is today, do you think it really changes much more than this or just improves on what it is now?
I think we're headed towards, once we get the sewer done, you're kind of headed towards uptown type stuff.
Oh, okay.
And the danger is going to be just like uptown, parking and movement. The district's only about 450 acres, and it has specific boundaries: Continental Boulevard, the levees, Stemmons, and Wycliffe. And so when you start packing it, you know, but that's what happened up in uptown.
Yeah.
When I came home from college, McKinney Avenue was nothing.
Yeah.
North Dallas High School was nothing. But so that will be in the next 20, 30 years.
And then the sewer issue, when does that play itself out?
In the next year. They're trying to go 25 feet underground and burrow a hole rather than dig up the street. If they dig up the street, we're screwed because the dust alone from that would just be horrific for the businesses. But I think they're going to tunnel, and then they'll put the line in. It's about a 180-inch line, and that'll take care of things forever.
Yeah,
according to the city.
Yeah,
and so that's an important kind of not flashy but important thing needs to be done.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I remember just hearing about one developer who was like all ready to go vertical on something, and it was like, can't do it. We can't handle the density.
We just lost a deal last week on the Market Center properties by the Ferris Wheeler and the Rodeo Goat because the pricing was just too high and they were needed to build a high rise. They can't do it. So they pulled out and they said, we'll come back later.
Yeah.
But they're supposed to build an office building on the Fazy Triangle parking lot right across the channel from Ferris Wheeler. And, of course, they just finished the connector, Trinity Strand Trail connector to the Katy Trail. And the next thing is a bridge, a walking bridge from High Line Overlook across to the Ferris Wheeler. And that will make that strip definitely a restaurant row for the locals.
Yeah.
Because, they have 500 apartment units down at the Margaret Hunt Hill, and they have probably another 1,000 in those two towers. And they'll probably build more in the future, but right now the apartment market's flooded. Yeah.
No, it is. That's what, weird. How many units? Do you know how many units they're building across the street from the Slocum building we're buying right now?
Probably at least 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The apartment guys are in a tough situation right now. And they're, everybody fired up the apartment game, and the headlines were, we don't have enough housing. And now I think we brought 40,000 units online last year, and there's 32,000 coming on this year. So it's crushing rents. And, we had a site under contract earlier this year, and we were buying it as an industrial building. But when we got into due diligence more and studied the zoning, there was a PD put on it. And with the cost of constructions and the pressure on rents on apartment complex, because we were like, okay, well, maybe we just scrape this and make an apartment complex. And with all that, they couldn't have given us the land for free to do the apartment. And it still didn't pencil.
You can't make the numbers.
Can't make the numbers work.
And like we sold the Lillan's building last November or January. And, it's 53,000 feet on that glass riverfront corner. And they want to tear that down and make a boutique hotel or something, but can't do it until we get the sewer done.
Yeah.
So you're going to see a rash of stuff come, and that alone will change. But, you've got 4 different plazas down there: Decorative Center, Oaklawn Plaza, Dallas Design Center, and the International Design Center.
Mm-hmm.
And those places probably hold about 400 showrooms.
Yeah.
And those lands someday, like Oaklawn Plaza, Harwood Pacific had a plan to build 2 towers on the Oaklawn Plaza. And they had a great presentation, and we went to that. But then they ended up selling it, probably because they couldn't build it yet.
Yeah.
And they sold it to a company that's going to kind of make it a quasi-retail center. I just saw the zoning thing come through the other day. So there's a lot of what they call sub-districts inside the PD.
Mm-hmm.
And those they're kind of like specialty things they can do inside those sub-districts. And so the Oaklawn Plaza will probably bring some different kind of user retail people.
Yeah.
Because when you populate the district sometime in the future, everybody in Dallas wants to be near water.
Yeah.
The Trinity Basin will be the largest inner city park in the country, bigger than Central Park. But it's a long evolution.
Yeah.
And of course you got Trinity Groves going in. They've built a bazillion apartments on Beckley.
Yep.
Over by Methodist Hospital. And used to be, and if you grew up in Dallas, you didn't go to West Dallas. You didn't go to Oak Cliff. But now that's all evaporating as people come here now, and there's gorgeous neighborhoods in Oak Cliff. And it's in a renaissance too.
Yeah.
So you're going that whole thing is going to go away.
Yeah. No, it's I remember, just growing up, my dad grew up in Oak Cliff, and just kind of going down. My grandma lived in Oak Cliff forever, and then like just West Dallas was, man, like you better be walking around with an Uzi.
Yeah, we just didn't go over there.
Yeah.
And of course, if you grew up in North Dallas, but before they extended Walnut Hill and Royal Lane and Forest over the Vickery Creek Basin, we didn't go over there either.
Yeah.
We didn't know those guys until we went to high school and found out all the parishes and St. Thomas and all those guys came from that area of Lake Highlands. We didn't go to Lake Highlands. We went down Forest Lane to Webb Chapel.
Yeah.
But, the city, we were the last house on the last street in 1959 at Preston Forest. And, we're inner city now.
Yeah.
And when the 4 years I was working at TI in the summer, we'd ride to work with my dad, and we'd go along the service roads where they were digging out LBJ. That was just cotton fields and stuff.
Wow.
And so, but Dallas, when I was growing up, it was 250,000, 300,000 people. And it just wasn't that complicated.
Yeah. No, it's, a lot of that had already passed when I was a kid, but I just remember one day, we're sitting in Plano right now. I remember one day driving to Plano or riding to Plano in the car with my mom. And I was just like, where? And we grew up in Irving. So we're coming from Irving to Plano, which is like a nothing drive now, and I was just like, where are we?
No, I lived in Grapevine for 14 years, but when I was a kid, Grapevine was a day trip.
Yeah, right.
All the houses out there had wheels under them.
Yeah,
And so, it's truly an amazing thing to be in a place where virtually everything is new.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find anything old in Dallas, which is unfortunate. But again, things weren't built to last.
Yeah.
They even tore down the old Jesuit high school there at Turtle Creek in Blackburn because it was falling apart.
Yeah.
And you do have to take that into account.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting, to say the least.
Yeah.
Having ridden downtown to see Santa Claus on the trolley with my mom, we didn't live that far away, but we'd drive and get on the trolley and go into downtown. Highland Park, we used to go to the Highland Park Village to get school clothes.
Yeah.
Couldn't do that today.
No. Unless you wanted the nicest clothes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so it's just what happens over time.
Yeah.
And it's been fascinating. And of course, the Trinity, I saw all those old red brick buildings as something that could convert.
Right.
Because they were not metal. And working with the Stemmons people was incredibly great. They really knew what they were doing and knew how to do it.
Yeah. And
so it's amazing to think, and now they're talking about, you hear a lot about the cedars and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But the merchants in the old days, the cedars was where all their big homes were.
Really?
And then they switched and went out to Live Oak, Munger, those big East Dallas streets.
Mm-hmm.
Sanger, the Sanger family and all those people moved out there because they could just go right back into town.
Yeah.
And they dammed White Rock Lake and said, this will have water for us for the next 150 years. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
City planning, the city, that's a whole nother issue, is dealing with the city.
Yeah.
And if you're in real estate, you end up having to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
But I've outlived most of the people I know new at the city.
The challenge with cities is they don't have any competition. So they're not really motivated to do an excellent job for you because they're like, I'm your only option. So, when we buy something, we try to stay away from anything that really is going to have a city component to it because I don't want another business partner, and that's what they become. And we had a site under contract. It was an iOS site, just a piece of dirt. But I don't like just land for iOS and all that stuff now. I like to have a building, like a shop on there. And so I was like, while I was under contract, I was like, I'm gonna build a shop on this thing if I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
And man, we had a pre-development meeting with the city, and after that call, I just went, I don't want to do this. This is going to be.
Yeah, I've had to appear before city council meetings so many times on things over the years, and the Dallas City Council. You've been through a bazillion council members over the years. Some are good, some are bad.
Yeah,
it's political.
Sure.
And it can slow things to a crawl.
Oh, yeah.
But that's, nothing's perfect, and all these people are trying to do their best and look out. They do look out for stuff. The Vice Squad took out the last nude modeling studio on the Jade Spa there on Market Center.
Yeah.
And, we waited a couple years for that to happen.
Yeah.
So we don't have any now down there. But there were 5 or 6 when I started back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And that was difficult. You couldn't get the tenants to move down the street because there was one on Slocum at 12 in the 1200 block there.
Mm-hmm.
And, people just would not. Showroom guys were not going to have their clients driving by that.
Yeah,
Took a long time to get rid of that.
Well, so you've probably made more cold calls than you can ever remember.
Yeah, especially back during the sale of the railroad lines, because we had to go see everybody. So we couldn't say later, you didn't ask me. So we made sure we saw everybody. Yeah. And it was a good intro,
Yeah, it's a good reason to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that always helps. I've seen younger brokers walk in just with nothing. And man, what a mistake. It's just a waste of time. And, I've always, when at Mercer Company, if I tell any of the younger brokers, I'm like, hey, listen, when I was making calls at a very high level, every week I had every call sheet I was going to make, and I had a flyer about a specific property and why I was going to give it to that guy. And that was done by the end of Sunday, because I knew Monday I had to be out there and have relevant information to people.
Yeah, and that's what I found was the most important thing. Was I realized that the neighbors didn't know anything about what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I ended up starting a newsletter, because if I had to tell everybody every time I made a cold call everything that was going on, you couldn't make 2 or 3 and you'd be all morning.
Yeah.
So we catch them up with the newsletter, and then you become the source of information.
Yeah, you become the authority.
Yeah,
you're the authority in the area, and that's that's a brand. That's your brand.
Yeah, and it's cool because it works. It's the truth.
It is.
You don't have to make up stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go in there and brag about all these deals you made. People want to know what's going on.
Yeah. What's
the crime level? What's this? What's that? When's this street going to be repaved?
Yeah, I always found that when I was working Brook Hollow, my ability to display relevance about every single property on every single street just made people go like, man, I got to work with this guy, because I'm going to miss something if I don't, And so I think that's obviously what you did. And, everybody, like I said, you use Submarket specialization with the name of the company,
I have to get it for you. I have one of those inked maps I did up Brook Hollow.
Yeah.
Nobody wants it. I'll get it for you.
I'd love it. I would love to have that.
Yeah.
So
people don't realize what a incredible thing modern graphics and hovercraft and film and all that can do.
Yeah.
That just didn't exist. You were talking ruby lifts and all that stuff in printing.
Yeah.
And it was a big thing just to get a flyer out.
Yeah.
But that's what the people want to know.
Yeah.
They want it, and it all starts with real estate. What are rents? What's selling? Who bought this? Did my neighbor do that?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can supply any of that information, you become important to them. I remember they told us it took about 7 calls on somebody before the receptionist would know who you were.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know something, that's the other fascinating thing is you can not only get entrance, but you go from the lobby right into the head guy's office,
mm-hmm.
and you talk to him, and you have access during the time you're doing the deal. What's sad is after the deals are done, a lot of times it's hard to get back. There's so many people looking for you.
Yeah, no, it's and then sometimes your clients get upset when you don't come see them. You almost have to go call on clients more than you do prospects, because I know now if I ever call one of my clients to go, "Where you been?"
Yeah,
I'm like, what? Did you need something?
You don't like me anymore?
You don't like me?
Yeah.
What? Where you been? I'm like, well, where you been? The phone rings both ways, man. You want to call me?
Yeah, some of them you never do want to see again.
That's true.
You know, some people just make life miserable.
Yeah, no.
Just trying to get from point A to point B, and they have no rational reason for doing it.
Yeah.
That's just their method of operation.
It is
frustrating.
It's crazy how, too, it's worked for them somehow in life. But no, there's people I've worked with, and I'm just like, nah, I don't need to do this again. Like, I'm good.
Well, in the end, the real estate thing becomes a people thing.
Yep.
And there's so many types and strategies. You know, somebody the other day I was trying to tell this broker, I said, those people, they don't want a building. They're just x-raying you to find out what the market is so they can go negotiate a new lease with their landlord.
Yeah.
You know, over the years, you begin to realize the motives behind a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of uncanny how you intuitively figure out in a few minutes what's going on.
Yeah.
Because it's to me, it was always kind of rude. You know, why don't you just ask me? That's what I do. Don't play games.
Yeah. I always thought it was funny. There was this guy in Brook Hollow. He would always call me to get all the information out of me. He owned a building, sold his company. The company leased his building. They'd come up on renewal. He'd be like, let's go to lunch and give me all this information. And then he would make me pay for lunch.
Right.
And he wouldn't even let me represent him on the renewal. And it was just like, I was like, he did that to me like twice. And then he called me again a third time, and I just quit taking his calls.
It happened to me just in April. A guy called me. I sold him a building. He bought it for like $167 a foot. And what he really wanted to know is what it was worth today. And so I just flipped the conversation and said, you know, your building's probably worth $350.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was so excited that I told him he didn't have to take me to lunch. I mean, a lot of that is, and then a lot of people, they don't listen.
Yeah.
They don't, for some reason, they don't think you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating because you do know what you're talking about and you can tell them and they won't take the suggestion, and then their building sits vacant for another 6 months and then you get blamed for that.
Yeah.
You know, all the money they lose in 6 months of vacancy, they could have charged the lower rate and had a tenant.
Yeah. No, it's, you know, many, many times have I listed out the things we need to do to win on this listing, and they don't help you out. And I used to always make fun of more of the corporate brokers. I'd be like, do you realize your landlord does everything for you? And mine, like, nothing. Like, no paint, no carpet, beg them to get the power on, you know?
Well, even that, you know, I finally ended up knowing all the inspectors, and that was help. But the city has literally turned itself over 3 or 4 times so that the people that are working down there now, they don't know you at all.
Yeah.
And they're very bureaucratic and they don't really care. You're just a problem to them.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line is we do deals that make the city have companies that pay taxes and sell products. And if we can't get them in, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I don't think, I think trying to explain that to them is.
Yeah. Well, the ones that understood it are gone.
Yeah.
And I remember I went down there for some parking thing, and the lady said, well, I'm the supervisor. Would you mind if I brought 5 or 6 trainees in to hear how you're doing this? And I said, no, I don't care. But you know more than they do.
Yeah.
But they can hold up a project for weeks.
Yeah.
And use up the tenant's free time.
Yep.
Trying to get a CO.
Yeah.
So, all these things happen, and it happens all at once. And your day is never the same. And your no 2 deals are really the same. That sounds strange, but it's true. And there's always something that's what I call a fatal flaw in each building.
Yeah,
Whether
totally.
It's plumbing, electrical, parking, this, or a ceiling height, or
easements
so
or
many,
something.
easements that just
kill
the deal.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, it doesn't matter because you're not paying for it.
Yeah. 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 You're not the one that has to get out of it. So
I think the biggest ruse I ever saw over the years was environmentals back in the 90s. Those could kill a deal so quick.
Yeah.
And everybody saw asbestos in everything. And that was a total deal killer. And now here we are 20 years later, and people say, I should have done that deal. I'm not scared of that anymore.
Yeah.
But the deals are long gone.
Yeah. And it's funny, asbestos cleanup really isn't that expensive. It's not that big of a deal.
It's not if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But it's the rip-off guys back in the 90s that were charging people a fortune.
Really?
To do this stuff.
Well, they're preying on fear, Well,
like that, the Uncommon Market building was 44,000 feet. It had 4,000 feet of asbestos tiles in it. Mm-hmm. And I lost two guys from buying that because they were afraid of the tile. I said, okay, we can get rid of the tile. It's not like it's radioactive or something.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of that went on, and tanks underground and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but anyway.
Well, there's something I always like to ask on this is what was one of your most crazy, challenging, awkward co-calls you ever made?
Well, I wrote this up the other day, and this thing I put in the hall at Mercer Company, and it was about this guy, Merrill Kirk.
Okay.
And Merrill's passed away now, but he was the strangest guy I ever met. He wore black pants, black cowboy boots, a white shirt, and a black vest every day. And he was selling this, what in the business they call French armalou furniture. It's that gaudy French furniture with the brass edges and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he was buying this stuff from Egypt, and he was selling it to people, especially little old ladies who wanted that look, as antiques. And they weren't antiques at all. And he ticked off some husbands by selling a couple $100,000 of this stuff to the wife. But then he was down in that 1308 Dragon building. It was dark and dingy, and when the bell would go off and I'd be there, he'd pull a drawer out full of aftershaves and spray himself down. And he had pale white skin and a jet black hair like Dracula, and that's what the guys in the neighborhood called him, Count Dracula. He was a strange dude. And there are other infamous people like George Benfonte, the guy who would, I drove up his building on Dragon, and there were all these women there, and they were all crying. I said, "What's the matter?" And they said, he took our deposits, and now he's taking our sofas, and we don't know where he was an upholsterer. And he got run out of the district. And there was another guy that would, he would have his workers sand out the word made in Mexico. And he actually had a brand that he could burn in that said made in France. Guys like that. So that's just, the antique world is like horse trading. You don't know really what you're talking about unless you really know what you're talking about. So you had some people like that. But there's so many quirky deals over the years, deals that I know when John Fazy bought where the two Irby Towers are. Mm-hmm. That was a 110,000-foot building that was used by Computer Associates out of New York. And we worked on that 2 years. And he bought it for around $10 a foot. And, it connected to that 1949 Stemmons with the bridge. And but it had asbestos in it. Yeah. It had asbestos boilers, and it had an uneven floor. Got so bad I went out and hired my own engineer to measure the floor because, they bring in these so-called experts and say, the floor's all messed up. You got to deduct for that. I said, no, I checked it. It's not. So you get into engineering, surveying, asbestos, environmentals, all the stuff that you didn't think had anything to do with leasing buildings.
Yeah. That's how you learn real estate, though. That's how you learn how to sell it, right? That's how you learn how to run a transaction, especially on the sales side. It's when someone's buying an asset, it's a big commitment for them, and so they're kind of thinking through. If you can point out a lot of these things, it really provides a lot of value to them. So
yeah, and I thought if I had the time, which I don't, I would buy a pinball machine, and I would, on the dingers and the thing, I would put all the screwy stuff that goes on a real estate deal. Because that's what happens when you send in the contracts, like pulling the pinball. The ball goes up and it winds through all these different things. And maybe it gets down to the bottom to close. Yeah. But there's, you have to know about title stuff. You have to know where to go. You have to know what to do. And I think a lot of brokers just think, well, these guys want the building so much, they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But I just haven't had that happen.
Yeah, no, it's that's a very interesting analogy. I like the pinball analogy, the real estate pinball machine. That's pretty cool. You're exactly right. I mean, it goes to the top, and here we go. There's so many twists and turns.
Your skill.
Yeah.
What can get. I mean, I've closed 1 million deals that had I not known how to get them from point A to point B, we'd have never closed.
Yeah.
And that even includes financing, for God's sake. Suddenly you're a banker.
Oh, yeah.
I think the greatest misconception, I have guys all the time that call me and say, I want to buy an investment property in the district. I said, well, really there are no investment properties. It's buy and hold.
Yeah.
Or if you pay $300 a foot for a building and you have to convert it to a showroom and you can only lease it for $16 a foot, that ain't going to fly.
Yeah.
So that's frustrating because a lot of people, they think it's that easy.
Yeah. No, it's not. A lot of people had, I remember, I want to say it was 2019. I was just looking at vacancy rates, and the vacancy rate for lease property in the design district was pretty high because a lot of people came in there and thought they could do typical commercial real estate, buy it, fix it up, and lease it up for some crazy number that tied to what they fixed the building up for. And that's just not the case.
No, it's not at all the case. And over the years, I've seen many, and people, I say, well, why didn't you buy anything? And I said, I saw many people buy things and crater because the ups and downs of the market are pretty severe. And, you have a building sit 6 months, that's going to cost you a lot.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, and some of them set for years. It's
I got one right now that's been on the market for 2.5 years because they won't come down on the price.
Yeah,
They'll never get that money back.
No,
and the building deteriorates.
Yeah.
So,
those things, you leave those things alone, they just start falling apart. Yeah. Okay. Something else I always like to ask: Did you ever get any sketchy situations or anything just kind of really crazy? A lot goes down with commercial real estate and because of the dollars involved.
Back in, after John Orr died, Pettigrew and Associates, back in 2006 or 7, he died without a will, so the court took over all 4 of his buildings, and they assigned me to be the broker to sell them. And this unscrupulous guy, we had it under contract in the title company. And this guy, he sent this guy to see me. It was almost like one of these gangster things. And we were walking through the building. It was $76,000, huge damn thing.
Yeah.
And he said, I can make it worth your while to kill that contract. Basically offering me a bribe if I would screw up that deal.
Yeah.
Do that. And that was one of the only times. I had another thing like that when I sold the old Lee Optical building to Jim Lake, and another group came and said, we'll pay you such and such if you'll bump that contract out.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's mostly little stuff that are against codes.
Yeah.
That people want you to look the other way.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is the city, if they catch you, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And I don't need the trouble.
Yeah.
I have enough to do that I can do without causing trouble. But those were the only 2 times I really thought like I was being leaned on to do something that was totally unethical and pushy. And that one guy was scary. He was a strange dude. I thought, this is weird. But we finally sold all that stuff to David Wildman.
Oh, David Wildman. I sold him he bought a building that I had on Quaker. It's crazy. We put that building, he leased it, and he had a purchase option. And when he leased it, buildings were $35 a foot. And he was like, I got to have a purchase option. I was like, so we finally agreed to a purchase option. We agreed to a fixed purchase option at $100 a foot. And my guy was like, if it goes to 100, whatever. Well, when it came time, it was probably 175 a foot.
No, and most of my guys won't do that. They say it encumbers the property.
Well, it does. It was honestly, like when I got to that point with that lease, I was like, man, honestly, I kind of did a bad job here, letting this happen. But like my guy was like, hey man, let's just do it. If I got $100, I mean, I think he probably paid $10 a foot for the building. And, but still, it's funny because we literally, when it came down to it, we were like, we might need to get on the phone with an attorney and see if there's any way out of this. And, but he, but it worked out because he was like, well, let me owner finance it to you so that I can make up some of this. It all worked out great. And, it was what it was. And David closed. But it was just funny. It was crazy, the skyrocket in value of those buildings. So
yes, it happened fairly quickly. In fact, in the 2009 savings and loan debacle. No, that was the subprime lending debacle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of my guys thought, hey, buildings are going to drop to $10, and they built up all these so-called war chests. But the buildings never really dropped down to below $40 or $50 a foot, and that's still iffy if you have to renovate and then try to lease it out.
Yeah,
and some buildings are just not rehabable.
Yeah. No, that's true.
No matter what you do, like that one on the corner of Dragon, the old Goodchild building, most people paid a fortune for that. And then they went in there, and now they've already gone out of business. It was on the market for $700 a foot. I'm going, are you crazy? So, you get a lot of that. But in the end, having Riverfront and Market Center have worked out well. Irving Boulevard's not going anywhere. The big thing is going to be, as the city does things along the river or in the river, it's going to become real popular. And, that's why Ed Ewing's house is 5 stories. You almost have to be 5 stories up to see down into the river.
Yeah.
And most people don't know this either, but the city, after we wrote the PD, there are 10 islands along Levee Street that are cut by the rail curbs. And the city came back and said, okay, you can build a parking garage for 4 or 5 stories, but then you have to reduce the footprint to a narrow tower, because we don't want developers to build a wall of buildings along the levee that you can't see into the levee. So that's that plat plus the Corps of Engineers concern about, they think the levee goes down underground.
Yeah.
And they control it. So that's difficult too.
Yeah. Well, what is like probably one of your most unique deals that you ever pulled off that, or just a deal that you're like, man, that had a lot of challenges, but I got it done, or just something that kind of stood out in your career?
Well, almost all of them turned out to be always more than I had thought. I know we worked a long time selling that 4 acres of land on Inspiration that J.C. Anderson owned, because, in the 1930s, there was a fire downtown, and they dumped all the refuse from the fire on that 4 acres. And over the eons, it got covered in dirt. And so when they started to do the drilling for the environmentals, they started finding car frames, bumpers, stoves, all this stuff, and they started digging it up. And the next weekend, all these guys were out there hunting through this dirt, looking for antique bottles and stuff, anything they could find.
Yeah.
And then we had to scrape 15 feet off the top of that.
Oh, wow.
Before they build on it. And of course, JC said, it's their problem. And, they built those apartments, and we had a storm, and it was that wooden front, and it collapsed. I thought that was pretty weird.
That was crazy. That was probably 2012 or something like that. Golly, that was nuts. Was it the storm that knocked it over?
Yeah.
Okay. For some reason, I thought someone said like the contractor did something wrong or something.
I think it was the wind.
Yeah.
Once it started falling, it just kept falling.
God, that was wild.
The other strange thing is, from Oak Lawn, right under Slocum and Dragon, the channel is still there. It's an underground stream. So the buildings along Slocum Street there, where Michelle Nussbaumer built her bunker, all that is on top of the underground stream. And you could follow the stream by the floor sinking. And I sold Ellen Holt a building down on Slocum, the other end, and the floor was sinking. And we hired Frank Spross to come in and redo it. And
Frank Spross, I remember him.
He called me and he said, "You got to see this." And I went down there, and they had dug down far enough that they saw the underground stream and the water in it.
Wow.
And the pier hanging in midair. And so he came up with a floor that was kind of like honeycombed and bent so it wouldn't collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And she bought the building and had a great business there for 20 years.
Yeah.
But that was weird to see that thing underground, because I know down where Bruno is and all that, those buildings were always having the floors fall in.
Yeah.
And it was expensive to fix structural stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I remember Bruno's place was a film thing where on Friday night, after all the local high school football games, they would bring their film of the game. And those guys would stay up all night developing the films and getting them back to the teams for Saturday morning review.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a weird business.
It's amazing the development in that industry now. It's like you instantly have it on your phone in 2 seconds to watch film on people. And
that stuff has been one of the greatest impacts on our industry from a marketing standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so superior to what we had back in the 80s before they had all this stuff. And the district, I believe, will, once we get through this sewer hurdle, and they're also, they already put in a culvert down at Continental.
Mm-hmm.
They tell me they want to build that same culvert all the way down South Riverfront to the pumping station.
Yeah.
And they'll get a handle on it. But it all depends on where the water and where it goes and when it goes. So
yeah.
The other rumor is that the World Trade Center is not signing any leases beyond 2030. And a couple of years ago, the World Trade Center people came out with a whole new building concept on that land where the apparel mart was.
Mm-hmm.
I have the renderings of it. I'll send them to you.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to see because the World Trade Center, it's good, but it's kind of worn out its days in terms of a means of selling furniture.
Yeah.
And with the way people do, the big North Carolina furniture factories that supplied all that beautiful mid-century modern furniture our moms had, they're gone. Most of that's gone. It's all Vietnam, Thailand, all those places are building this stuff.
Yeah.
So the furniture's not what it used to be. And that's why there are 5 or 6 mid-century modern stores out on the boulevard.
Yeah.
And all that's going to change, and the neighborhood stores will change.
Yeah.
The thing they'll eventually have to get is a grocery store of some kind.
Right. Yeah. You get the density down there, you're going to have somewhere to go shopping.
Yeah.
We were just talking a second ago. It's like Prosper. We didn't have a grocery store. Like I had to go to Frisco to go to the grocery store when I moved there. And we got one, and it was like the heavens opened up and put a grocery store down there, and it was incredible.
Yeah. And yet that's a critical factor, and you can't escape it.
That's right. So,
well, it's going to be the next 20 years will be interesting for the district. And we did what we could 20 years ago to lay out the way to make it all work. Yeah. And I think we did a pretty good job. The big thing we got screwed up about was the liquor and alcohol, because when we wrote the PD, we had a certain SUP for outside amusement, but not inside amusement. And so some of these clubs have opened up down there, and they cause a lot of problems at night.
Yeah.
And we made a motion to change that, but Omar Tavares tabled it. He's not our favorite guy.
Well, let me ask you this: what I always like to know what kind of like habits and routines do you kind of have that you think just made you a successful broker throughout all these years? And
well, mainly the computer, and when I turned those little listing cards into a computer that I could load and file, and then I added to that to cover the rail beds, the taxes, and all the different things people were asking me. Then I could, it could project rents, it could do all this stuff, and that really gave me, because I developed an appraisal thing called renovated value, because I was having trouble with the banks saying, okay, here's an unimproved building next to an improved building. And you say, well, somebody bought this building for $50 a foot and put 20 in it. So now the value's up here, not what they bought it at. And the appraisers, I made a lot of deals by being able to show the true value of things. And that had a lot to do with doing deals and seeing things renovated and so forth. So, yeah, and you could print out. We did the whole railroad deal using printouts and computers to keep track of all the hundreds and hundreds of contracts. Mm-hmm. Back in those days, the title companies, you had to know somebody to get a title search on something that you didn't have a contract on.
Yeah.
But George Schaefer, I had legal help, and I had Safeco Title Company, Dolores Evans, and I could call them up about any building I needed to know who owned it and where they owned it. Yeah. And I'd log all that in. So that gave me a good feeling of who owned what and if there were multiple ownerships and all this stuff. It plays a part.
Well, I think, having data like that in your essentially you built your CRM off of that. And, the top brokers I always know have the tightest CRMs and have the best information. And so that's, you can go in and audit when we see a guy that's not really succeeding, it comes in, we'll go audit his CRM, and a lot of times there's a bunch of holes in there that, you're not doing that's kind of like the mowing the lawn every week type thing,
Well, I always pictured it as having, when you were a kid, you'd have these helium balloons, and all the helium balloons in a deal, the buyer, the seller, all the components, and you're pumping them like this. Mm-hmm. And, if one hits the ground, the deal blows up.
Yeah.
And you have to do all the things that everybody's supposed to do on their own, but you better check.
Yeah.
To get the deal done and not have any screw-ups. And that whole part of it is what I don't think people understand about doing this job. And actually your clients, they all think we just go to long lunches and drive around aimlessly. And,
I've always found their attorneys too really love to you're just a broker, I'm an attorney. Man, I've seen attorneys really mess some deals up. And,
I wrote a as-is, where-is contract for the Ducati guy.
Uh-huh.
And he had got burned on a deal out in Burleson, so he hired this big downtown law firm. But the seller was a really character guy, a caterer out of Colorado. And he told me, he said, you do what you need to do to get this done. So I wrote this as-is, where-is contract, and I went downtown and to the attorneys. And this young attorney came in, and he didn't sit down. He's walking around me, and he's saying, well, this is a deal killer. We're not going to do this. And I just took the contract folder and flipped it over and said goodbye and started walking for the door. They all freaked out. Yeah. The head of the law firm came in, and he said, you're just a broker. You can't do this. I said, I'm doing it. I'm going.
Yeah.
And they finally signed it.
Yeah.
But I thought, man, how often does that happen, that you can hammer downtown lawyers and have control over a deal?
Well, when you have what other people want, you're in control. And it's funny. I had a very similar thing happen to me. It wasn't with an attorney, but this was back when all these private equity groups started buying all these buildings in Brook Hollow. And one of them was like, come over and meet with me. And okay, I come over and meet with them. Bring them some buildings. I open up my laptop. And I mean, right out the gate, the guy goes into me and he's like, so how do I know if you show me something, you're not going to sell it to Cantex, or your brother's not going to buy it, or you're not going to buy it? He just starts going into me, and I just went, I don't need you.
You don't need this stuff.
I don't need you. I'll see you later. No one talks to me like that. And he was like, whoa, it totally changed his tune. It's funny. Now he's a great friend of mine now, but it was just funny. I was like, bro, You need us. You need to put money out. You need to know where the buildings are at. That's what I do.
It took me a long time to make that transfer from being the weak side to saying, look, I know what I know. I'm good at what I do. If you don't want to do this, I'm gone. I'm not going to waste my time.
Yeah.
And that was when you knew you were a broker.
Yeah.
And you knew what you knew.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that people don't realize are going on.
Yeah.
And it's like going fishing, which lure do you use? What part of the lake do you go to? And, even where you launch the boat. I remember that guy, Irvin Polishook.
I don't
remember
know.
him?
Mm.
His job was he was a fisherman's guide in Lake Texoma.
Okay.
And he owned all these buildings. He must have made a fortune doing that. I thought, what a job. But he died, and his son took over the buildings, and he's a lawyer, and he's a complete jerk. And Riley, when Riley was working with me, this guy's been bugging me about getting a price for this building, and my guy didn't want to give a price yet. And I wrote him an email, and I said, we don't have a price yet. Oh, and by the way, you're not doing yourself any favors for bugging my client all the time about this.
Yeah.
And Riley said, you can't say that to somebody. I said, I'm old. I can say anything I want. Nobody's gonna. And then I was with Kyla, and we were showing the Market Center building.
Yeah.
The broker showed up in like a swimsuit, thong sandals, and a T-shirt. And we're walking back through the buildings, and I said, how can anybody show up in business and look like that?
Yeah.
And Kyla says, how can you say that? And I said, the guy's an idiot. And he was an idiot. So, the people part of what we do is almost unexplainable.
Yeah. No, it is. There's you're managing a lot of different personality types. Really trying to, it's also, you're always trying to uncover what the real need is, and they don't always tell you. I can't tell you how many times I feel like I worked on a deal, and then they end up, I just can't ever get there with them. And then they go do something totally outside of the parameters they gave me, you know, and you're like.
And I told Riley, I said, you have to look at these people that are doing deals and find out about them, find out if they're married, divorced, if they have kids. I said, you can spend a week with a guy and get him all fired up to do something, and he'll go home and tell his wife, and she'll kill the deal.
Yeah.
Over dinner. And I said, you need to find out who's running the show.
Yeah.
I just had that happen. We had this guy offer $270 on a building, and the wife came back at $350. I just killed the deal, and I said, you should have waited to see what the wife said.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they're more powerful in these deals.
Yeah.
And once they blow them up, it's hard to put them back together.
Yeah. Well, I always like to ask this: do you have a favorite book, or like a book that really kind of touched you when you read it?
Well, being in history, I read a lot of books.
Yeah.
And but if I'd have done my thesis, I probably would have done it on T.E. Lawrence, who wrote The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, which is about his ventures in World War I in Arabia with the Arab Revolt. And the reason I liked it was he had to deal with all these Arab tribesmen and all these different personalities. And it was just fascinating to see how all that worked out. So I found it was very readable and very interesting. So I always fall back. But there's so many books that are interesting. I try to push them off on my son, but he won't read them. It's that's one reason I liked history so much, is I wanted to find out the truth about what was going on.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, I was sitting down here waiting for you, and I looked on my phone. There's a new movie coming out that's backed by some historians that say that Abraham Lincoln was gay. I'm going, are you out of your mind? How are you going to do that?
Yeah.
And stuff too about, when I grew up, the big 500-pound gorilla behind us was always World War II.
Yeah.
My father and his father-in-law bought a little tiny television in the early 50s. It had about an 8-inch screen, and they bought it to watch Notre Dame football. But my brother and I would get up and go in there in the morning on Saturday with our bowls of Rice Krispies, and you turned it on. They didn't have anything to show. What would they show? They showed the big picture, all these black and white things of the war.
Yeah.
And, we were quite certain by the time we were 5, we'd be in the Army.
Yeah.
And so I always wondered, well, what really happened? There's what they say happened, what really happened.
Yeah.
And that's
like getting into the bottom of it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just, it's so common nowadays that the people you see in the public have a completely different agenda behind what they're putting out.
Oh, yeah.
And,
It's
to really know. And the other thing is to know what happened, what really happened,
Yeah.
How did Davy Crockett really die at the Alamo? And all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which sometimes you can find and sometimes you can't, but a lot of it's in the documents.
Yeah.
It's just amazing what they find out now.
Yeah. No, me and my kids, we went to, my wife, my kids, we went to, we stayed in San Marcos or New Braunfels for spring break, but we went to San Antonio, went to the Alamo. And I've been to the Alamo, but it's like, it's been 30 years or something. And it was just cool kind of going through it all again. And like, man, this is, we're, over here on this corner, here's what happened. And on this corner, so it's like, maybe as you get older, you get a little more appreciation for those things.
And you try to visualize it.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, if you go to Europe, it's like Disneyland for history people.
Yeah.
And you think, God, how did they do that? And, how did they get water into Rome?
Yeah, how did they build things like that? Like with a hammer and a chisel?
Yeah. And I go to Home Depot and you look at all the modern tools for everything. And, up until the 1950s, that didn't exist.
And we can't get construction done on time.
Yeah. And new products are fascinating too.
Yeah. So,
we live in a really interesting time, and we grew up in a very interesting time.
Yeah. Well, what's something about Bob Darrouzet most people don't know? Something unique or something that
would you
feel?
Well, as you get older and people, people say, wow, you're really smart. You know all this stuff. I said, well, that doesn't make me smart. That just makes me old. You live life and you have things happen, and there's no straight shot, and so many things it's the pinball machine for life, and you get shot out of your mom, and off you go.
Yeah.
And, you don't get to pick your parents.
Yeah.
We're the only species on the planet that takes 20 years to raise a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And time, it allows, makes things that are new old, but it also allows for the new in the future. And the past, present, and future of everything is you're just here in the present, but so many things and decisions you make are predicated on things that happened in your past.
Yeah.
And that definitely has an effect, especially I just went to my 1975 50-year class reunion from Ursuline, And you see these kids when they're 16, you don't think you're going to see them when they're 70.
Yeah.
And there they all were. And, you know, we had a great time, and it was good to see them. And it's again, you know, I said, well, now you guys are on the whole other side. You know, I met you when you were a kid. You were 16. You weren't married, barely had a boyfriend, da-da-da-da-da. And now you got grandchildren, and you're old, and you got medical issues and all this stuff. So you've gone through the whole thing, and now you show up 50 years later. You know. Of course, I was only like 26 when I was teaching. First time. I was 22 when I started. I was only 6 years older than the kids I was teaching.
Yeah.
But I was also the only guy on the faculty of 55 nuns and women. So that was pretty wild.
Yeah.
I could write books about that stuff too. In fact, I saw Jack in the lobby yesterday, and I said, Jack, I want to go to lunch with you and find out what you did at UT. He said, okay. I said, well, you know, I lived at the Castilian. And he said, wow. I said, yeah, but I got thrown out of it too. For all the horrible things we did to people. And, but, you know, I envy guys like Jack because they, with a little guidance, they're going to live in an incredible century.
Yeah.
I have a little nephew that they named Robert, and he's 6 months old or something. I'm thinking, God, what a life this kid's going to have.
Yeah.
And our other little nieces and nephews, you'd think they had a computer chip in their head, the way they can do all these computer things and learn. They're like sponges. And so, you know, they're not going to grow up like we did at home.
Yeah.
And that happens in every generation.
Right. There's always something that differentiates them all. And
everybody's on the leading edge of their experience. And, you know, I think of my grandparents. My great-grandmother came from out to Kansas in a covered wagon and lived long enough to see the guy land on the moon. And I thought, wow, that was pretty amazing. But, and I think of my grandmother in Austin, you know, all they had was a telephone and a little black and white TV in one TV station, Channel 7. Mm-hmm. And yet they grew up at a time when everything was changing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's fascinating. And you can extend your life's knowledge by looking at history and looking at people.
Yeah.
I think that's a major thing. And
yeah. No, it's what's cool is just, I appreciate all the time today because we've kind of been able to hear the history of real estate, which is, we're all real estate nerds around here. So.
Well, as I try to tell Riley, I said, you really have to immerse yourself in this.
Yeah,
and
you do.
You better know as much as you can because whatever you don't know is going to come up and bite you in the butt in a deal, and you're going to say, "Oh, I should have done that or watched that." But I don't know. I never dreamed when I was teaching that I could sell anything, but a history degree is not going to get you very far. But teaching and presenting stuff in a way that people can understand, that'll help.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a family of engineers. I mean, those guys, they're in another world.
Yeah.
And all the first four brothers were all liberal arts majors except one, Michael. He was business, but he was a twin. And all of us have struggled because we never got into the business side of anything. My dad sort of hated all that. He was a theoretical physicist and mathematician, and those guys don't ever touch the ground.
Yeah.
And So we didn't know anything about business, and we didn't think that was even a road. But so, one of them's a lawyer and a film writer, and the other one's a PhD anthropologist. One of them's an architect, but all that stuff too. Architects, you can get a degree, but you try to become famous. That's tough.
Yeah.
So Michael, he had a degree in hospital administration from Trinity in San Antonio, and he's the head of all the county medical societies in Texas now. And his sister was a computer at Notre Dame, and she's always had a job because she can do computer stuff.
Yeah.
So,
well, no, it's kind of fascinating the evolution of everything, how faster everything happens now, the ability, the access to information that we have. It's kind of changed the landscape of business and changed all these things. But yeah, no, it's that those are the things that they kind of help. They kind of help. And they kind of hurt you too, because you don't have to learn it as much because you just rely on it always being there,
Well, the biggest problem I have now is in the world of computer programs and stuff, Microsoft just changed Outlook completely.
I hate that.
Now I have to learn a whole new thing.
As soon as you get used to it,
and even Windows, it's gotten beyond me. But so what you do is you think, well, I'm just not going to learn that. But it all started to fall apart when I got my first pager. Then I remember standing at a telephone at Mockingbird in Irving in the cold at one of outside calling in.
Yeah. Roll of quarters in your pocket.
This lady named Susan Gideon, she had a Cadillac convertible with a radio telephone in it. Mm-hmm. And I said, Susan, where'd you get it? And she said, down on Dragon Street down there at the end. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, how long does it take? Oh, she said the waiting list to get one's about 10 years. And I thought, well, and then cell phone. I read about cell phones and popular science. I've been with Primeco Verizon for 26 years. They do respect you if you do that. They don't cut you off if you don't pay on time.
Yeah.
But yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, change the playing field. So.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I watched Riley. I mean, that kid, her whole life was on that phone.
Oh yeah,
and that's going to be, and that's why I wouldn't want to teach now unless they couldn't have cell phones in the classroom. But just being a kid, I think is tougher.
Yeah, no, it's I feel like my kids need to go on a phone diet,
But you can't stop it.
Yeah, it's tough. It is.
I mean, all their friends are into it.
Yeah. Well, Bob, this has been really interesting, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks for having me. Been an awesome history lesson here and all the things. And a lot of people will get a lot of value out of here. And a lot of the brokers that listen to it will. So,
okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob.
Okay.
Bob Darrouzet.